welcome to the panel. And of course, welcome to the audience out there. This is our third webinar on sustainability. Last year, we invited Gary McGovern and discussed why sustainability needs to be on your web tech agenda. And before that, we presented a very hands-on webinar that we called How to Make Your Umbraco Website More Sustainable. Today, we have named it Digital Sustainability and How Enterprises Can Take Action with Umbraco. And we've invited Mike Berners-Lee to join us. And when I say us, I mean some of my fellow community friends from the Umbraco Sustainability team, Amy, Andy, Neil, and Rick. And now, when you all mentioned, maybe we should take a short introduction to all of you. And maybe Mike, you go first.
Okay, it's great to be here. So I'm Mike Berners-Lee. I'm a professor at Lancaster University. All my work is around sustainability, different angles on sustainability, a lot on carbon footprinting, but a lot on the sort of wider perspective on the sustainability challenge. I run a business called Small World Consulting that helps organizations to respond to the climate and ecological emergency, and again, with quite a wide framing on what that response might look like. And I've written various books about this whole challenge, some about carbon footprints and some about climate change, but most recently a book called A Climate of Truth, which is saying we need a lot more truth if we're going to start getting anywhere on any of this stuff.
Yeah. And next, Amy.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Amy Zuber. I work for a human-centered and more recently planet-centered design agency called Nexa Digital. So yeah, great to be here as part of the conversation. Looking forward to sort of bringing Mike's perspective into some of the realities that we face day to day in the work with our clients. Thanks.
Yeah, welcome. And Andy.
Hi everybody, great to be here. My name is Andy Everdale. I'm the CTO at a global agency called Tangent. We deliver enterprise solutions for companies across the world.
Thank you. And Neil?
Hey everyone, yeah, I'm Neil Clark. I work for an organisation called MSQ. So we're a group of tech and creative and advertising agencies. And I'm responsible for our climate transition strategy. So looking across our operations, how we break down barriers for our employees, and then to sort of really scale the impact, how we work with our clients and how we work with the broader industry as well.
Welcome to you. And last but not least, Rick.
Thanks, Lasse. Yeah, so I'm Rick Butterfield. I'm a lead software engineer at a digital agency in the UK called Wattle. And I've been part of Umbraco's sustainability team since it started about 2 years ago. And I've spoken at events and conferences all about sustainability, and I've also built some Umbraco-based tooling that helps people monitor their Umbraco sites, which I'll talk about a little bit later on.
Amazing. Welcome. Yeah, and my name is Lasse, and I work as a product manager here at Umbraco, and also been part of the Umbraco sustainability since we started that a couple of years back. But Mike, you are, you could say, our main speaker here today. You've got a bit more time than the rest of the panel. And by the way, that's the agenda. We'll start out with you, then small introductions from the rest. And then in the end, hopefully we have a bit of time left, and we'll take questions. We've got quite a few questions coming in, so we'll go through some of them and else have an open discussion. But with that, over to you, Mike.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And it is, as I've said, it's great to be here. I'll just, I'll share some slides. Just bear with me one sec. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, the real cost of our digital lives. And I'm going to start, but I'm going to put it in the context of the wider sustainability challenge that we face. So I'm going to begin with a kind of big picture, stepping back to look at the situation we're in, and I'll start with a kind of climate dimension to it. I won't talk about me because I've already said who I am, so I'll skip that. So this slide just shows the 29 climate climate COPs that we've had, these big international conferences over the last 3 decades to try and address the crystal clear science that is telling us that climate change is a big deal, it's man-made, and we really have to do something about it. And there's been consensus on that for at least 30 years. Actually, the fossil fuel companies have known about it for at least 60 years. And Exxon, for example, has been modeling with, right back then, 60 years ago, they were modeling with really quite incredible accuracy the effects of carbon dioxide emissions on climate change. So we've had these COPs. Let's have a look at how effective they've been. So now we've got in the middle of this slide a graph of CO2 emissions annually from fossil fuel use. And I've drawn a marker in there for 1995 to represent the first one of those COPs. So that rising line represents the rate at which we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Broadly speaking, it represents the rate at which we're making the climate worse. In other words, we're accelerating into the problem. And what I want to say is that there's no evidence in that curve at all that those COPs have done anything whatsoever. Every year we make the climate worse by a larger amount than we made it worse the year before. And I'm saying this not to be depressing. I'm saying this because we've got to give ourselves the best chance we can possibly get of getting on top of the problem. Otherwise, it's going to come and hit us really hard. And to give ourselves the best chance, we have to face the realities of where we're at right now. So again, I'm not going to labor this, but just a few graphs of some of the records we've been breaking. It's pretty hard to keep these charts up to date, but on the left there, daily sea surface temperature. And all I want to show, what I really want to say is just how much we've been breaking these records by. You see the red lines there representing recent years. Well, those are, there's a lot of clear space between them and all the gray lines beneath that represent previous years over quite a few decades. And then in the center, we've got temperatures in September. And in September 23, suddenly it was half a degree hotter than ever before since records began. And that's an incredible jump. And then finally, the Antarctic sea ice. And there it was 11% lower than ever before. And it's not as if this has gone away. We had a month recently where we were 1.75 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And right now the scientific community is scratching its head as to why this year looks like it's shaping up to be about the second hottest on record, but we're not in an El Nino anymore, we're in a La Nina, which should be making the immediate effects of climate change much more subdued. So there's a lot of kind of concern that maybe we're triggering some tipping points that we actually can't row back from. Maybe the symptoms of climate change may be starting to create more climate change in a kind of escalating way that gets out of human control. It looks likely that we are still in time to do something about this and to get on top of it. But it is, that's not definite anymore. And so I suppose what I want to say is that, it's not surprising after 30 years of, broadly speaking, ignoring the science, or at least not taking effective action on the science, it's not surprising that it's really, really threatening to come back and bite us now. And some of the language being used in peer-reviewed academic papers by some of the world's top scientists right now are really quite, it's as close as you get to screaming in academic literature. Phrases like, the future of humanity hangs in the balance, because, it really is doing now. But this whole talk is not intended to be just doom and gloom, but it is important to be realistic about the situation that we're in. And the reason I say it is, in the words of James Baldwin, human rights campaigner, not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. We've got to stare this in the eye. And in doing so, we downgrade it from a problem that's too difficult to even look at to a lower category of problem, which is one that may be challenging, but it's not too hard to look at and talk about. So it's only by doing that that we give ourselves a decent chance. I haven't quite finished laying out the terrain yet, because if only it was just climate. The real context is we've entered this era called the Anthropocene. And by that, I just mean the era in which it is humans that are the biggest thing affecting the ecosystem. We are so powerful now. We have an ever-rising energy supply, and we also have an ever-rising technology tool set to go with that. And I know that we're all part of that technology tool set. And through that energy and technology mix, we exert our influence. And that influence is getting stronger and stronger, and the planet is getting more and more fragile compared to us. So we're in this kind of now a polycrisis. If only it was just climate. We talk more about climate, but linked to climate is the energy transition. We have a rising population. Some good news about the rising population, which is that if we can deal with a few socioeconomic issues, the evidence is that that will come nicely under control of its own accord, actually. The UN, I've got some one or two cheery pages in the book that are just making the case that the UN's predictions on population are probably a little bit pessimistic compared to some more nuanced analysis that takes account of socioeconomic developments and increasing provision of healthcare and so on, that affects population in a very positive way. But moving around this kind of what I call the outer layer of the polycrisis, we're hemorrhaging our biodiversity. That's threatening our food system. So is climate change. So is some of the pollutions that we're putting out. If I had more time, I'd talk about plastic a bit more, because it really is, the growth rate on plastic is so high, and it's becoming clear that it comes with health risks, not just to us, but to other species. And it's in there's microplastic in practically every organ of everyone on this call. And of course, with that come disease threats. So there's this kind of very joined up, multi-angled threat that we need to get on top of. And another way of looking at it is to say that we're just fundamentally unbalanced as a species at the moment. We've got so much energy and technology. We're so clever at that stuff. But now we need a kind of care and wisdom to exert that influence in a very, very careful way, and understand the problems that are systemic and complex, and don't lend themselves to kind of rapid fire, just immediate, knee-jerk kind of political decision making. So we need there's a kind of quite a big evolutionary challenge. It goes pretty deep. What we need to do. So, okay, the result of not yet being on top of this change of context, not yet having found a way of living in an Anthropocene fit manner, has been this great acceleration. So here are some graphs just showing, how at the moment all sorts of things are accelerating. Our and going skywards. Our population, our GDP growth, our water usage, our energy usage, all kinds of things are kind of really ramping up at a very high speed at the moment. And I write about this in the book in quite a bit of detail, that actually that kind of speed of acceleration is going to lead to a crash, or it will lead to a much better managed reset. And that's what we need to achieve. So we have the technology, and I'll talk at the end about the role of your technologies in this. But the really good news is we have most of the technology, right? So it's not fundamentally the technology that is stopping us. Here's a quick sketch of the energy transition, the clean energy transition. I'm not going to talk through every detail of this, but it's just a map of moving from left to right, the whole energy system, from power generation through to conversion, to storage, transport, a bit more storage after we've transported it, conversion to end use, and then end use. And I just want to talk about quickly on this talk, just about the most important pillars of this. So the most important thing is, well, three most important things are, first of all, to cut the fossil fuel, right? Now, the climate doesn't care how many renewables we've got. The climate cares how little fossil fuel we burn. So and it turns out that more renewables doesn't have the effect of leaving the fossil fuel in the ground. We have to separately engineer that. Once we're doing that, then the renewables start to help us. At the moment, we're just having more renewables and more fossil fuel every year. How does that become possible? Switch to the right. And we don't talk about this anything like enough, but the digital economy and the world of ICT can play a role in this if we get this right. We need to reduce the amount of energy that we use. Now, moving on to the world of ICT, everybody asks, well, ICT must be helping with this, is it, or isn't it? Because ICT's own footprint has been going up, but surely ICT brings about so much efficiency improvement that it must be good for the world's carbon emissions, surely. So let's have a look. I want to talk quickly about the role of efficiency in the economy, because this is such an important point that is so poorly understood by so many policymakers. So let's describe efficiency as the amount of output per unit of input. Right, so in any kind of system, maybe it's driving a car, so the efficiency would be if the output is the miles that you've managed to drive, and the input would be the petrol you put into the petrol tank of a traditional petrol car. So what happens if the efficiency improves? Well, the efficiency goes up. What actually happens is the outputs tend to go up by even more than the efficiency improvement. So if a tank of petrol used to drive us 100 miles, and we double the efficiency, so now it can drive us 200 miles, what happens is that driving a mile becomes half the price. So it becomes better value. So it becomes worth doing in more situations. So we end up driving a bit more than 200 miles. Sometimes some people call this the Jevons paradox. And so what happens is that the inputs go up, not down. We become more efficient, and if we're not careful, what the actual effect is that we burn more petrol, not less. And turning to ICT for a second, we are millions of times more efficient now than the ICT industry was back in the 50s at storing information, transmitting information, and analyzing information. And yet but as a result of that, we're doing probably billions of times more of all those activities. And that's why the carbon footprint of ICT is going up. But people say, well, that's okay, because ICT brings about efficiency in the global economy, doesn't it? And the trouble is that in bringing about efficiencies in the global economy ends up doing more by a larger amount than is justified by the efficiency improvement. And that's why the carbon footprint of the global economy is going up, not down, despite or maybe enabled by the efficiencies that are produced by ICT. So does that mean that the digital economy is a bad thing? Not necessarily, because if we could find a way of constraining the inputs, constraining the fossil fuel, then we have a totally different dynamic going on. Suddenly what happens is that efficiency gains have the effect of we can use efficiency gains to increase the outputs, in other words, do more of the things that are valuable to us, whilst decreasing the inputs, in other words, using less fossil fuel. So that's what we need, and the answer to that is we need some carbon pricing, but that's another story again. But it's something that all your business could be lobbying for, because it's actually such a commercial advantage opportunity for the digital tech industries. Okay, so why aren't we solving these technically solvable elements of the poly crisis? It's because there are things about our politics that aren't helping us to do the global cooperation that we need. I don't think I need to expand on that one particularly at the moment. There's things about our media that aren't helping us to focus on this and give us an accurate picture about it. There's things about education I won't talk about now for speed, things about inequality that's really important that we get on top of inequality. There's ways in which we are thinking about the economy that need reworking. There are some legal things we need to get straight. But what I want to just touch on right now is what this means for businesses and for technology. So that what it means for businesses, this context of the polycrisis, is there is no room now for businesses that don't primarily exist for the benefit of people and planet. And that's what we've got to, every business needs to focus on and ask itself, is our business model one that will thrive in an economy that is moving towards sustainability? And I think for me, that's a critical question for everybody on this call. And we ask it of all our clients. It's always the killer question. And then in terms of technology, technology is bringing us loads of great things, but it's also at the moment, it's part of the dynamic by which we're accelerating into this problem. And so we need to get much better at deploying our technologies for good purposes and not for bad ones. It's not enough just to be able to say, oh, this technology can be used for good things. We have to also say, and it won't be used for bad things. And that's really pretty challenging. And if you're a web designer, for example, it poses the question, what is this website going to be used for? Will it be used only for good things and not for bad things? What are the indirect impacts of it? Are we doing web design for a company that exists for the benefit of people and planet, or not? So I think those are probably quite challenging but really important questions to be asking. And then right at the core, and this is what I wrote my book about, A Climate of Truth, is ways in which we need to start learning to think better, and values that we need to start really pushing for. And I think this is a personal challenge for everybody in the workplace, but outside the workplace as well. I think some values that I think we have to have, they're must have, if humans are going to thrive in the Anthropocene, are really under challenge now. One of those is respect for people, all people, whoever they are, whatever country they're in, whatever race they belong to, as fundamentally equal as humans. And if we don't want to let that value slip out the window, then we've got to stand up for it, because right now it's under really, really serious challenge. The next one is to respect the environment and considering ourselves as part of it, not just users of it. And the final one is about honesty. And this is key for everyone on the call. There's so much greenwash in the business world at the moment. And there's so much that the digital economy can do to help us see the truth, but there's also so much that the digital economy can do to conceal the truth as well. And AI is clearly part of that. So we've got to get better at making sure these technologies are deployed only for good reasons. I think it's a real challenge for humanity right now. To just be optimistic for a second, I think we'll need a dose of luck in the next decade or two to actually create a better world, because we've been so lazy on the climate and other aspects of the polycrisis, and things are looking really quite serious. But there's nothing that the kind of movement towards a sustainable economy, and we could all imagine this in different ways, is fundamentally a quality of life improvement. It's weird that it's weird that we can't move towards it, and actually we're being held back by the nefarious vested interests of a few very powerful people. More details on that in the book. I just want to sort of finish with a few final thoughts, really, just to sum up what this might mean for everyone on this call. I think we've got to get our heads around, it's not okay just to say this technology can be used for good things. We have to be able to say, and it won't be used for bad things. And that's a challenge for any of us that use any digital technologies. We have to use less energy. Now, the energy companies don't, especially the fossil fuel companies, don't like that narrative, but it's absolutely clear cut. And the digital economy stands to enable us to use a lot less energy. So when I look at, I do quite a lot of traveling around the UK, especially, and I very rarely do a long journey by car. And that is absolutely enabled, so enabled by apps and things that help me understand how to piece together higgledy-piggledy journeys that involve bikes and trains and feet and buses and all sorts of different things. You know, so there's just one simple example. The digital economy absolutely does help us to live well, you know, live well for less. So the question for website designers would be, for me, it's, you know, sure, the carbon footprint of the whole world of ICT is going up rapidly, but can it justify it? And the biggest question is, what are those websites that you're designing going to do? What is their effect? Are they going to be encouraging people to live more sustainably, or are they going to be talking people into buying things that they don't really need that have a big impact on them themselves? I'll just come to a close. I've mentioned the rebound effect. I think that's a really important concept for everyone to understand. And then just finally, I just encourage everybody to be really brave and challenge any conversations that you find yourselves in at work or out of work that is not commensurate with an acknowledgement of a very serious climate and wider environmental crisis that we're heading towards, which should be affecting everything that every business says, thinks, and does. So I think it's really a time to stand up, especially now in a moment at which in America, in particular, that's becoming quite difficult to say and do. So yeah, so there's a kind of a call for personal courage, I think. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I'll unshare, but it's not questions. It's actually time to move on to the next speaker. How do I unshare? Stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. That will lead us to a brave woman. Amy, are you ready?
Yes, born ready. Thank you. And thanks, Mike. That was really, you know, interesting and enlightening to see. I think the way you frame it is always, yeah, it's realistic, but it's yeah, optimistic as well. So thanks for that. So yeah, just to kind of delve into that a little bit more then. So, you know, in recent years, we have seen that the agenda around sustainability isn't just a climate issue. And when you mentioned just then, Mike, around sort of the different factors impacting the poly crisis, especially in the tech and the digital industry, sustainability is more so a client priority nowadays. It's a strategy issue and increasingly an opportunity. But one thing I found is that knowing that sustainability matters isn't enough. We also need to be able to talk about it and help others be able to act on it. So I know that many attendees on this webinar today will be working in digital agencies. And like you pointed out before, Mike, the climate crisis it's man-made. And so in our world, in digital agency land, it can be so easy to just feel like you're part of the problem and that you're contributing to the issues. So, you know, when we receive briefs and RFPs from clients with a view to building more, it excites us, and it excites us for the right reasons. And I think in the right parameters it should. However, when the more can come at quite a disruptive cost, I think we have a real responsibility to be able to help our clients weigh up that cost and what their options might be, and to be able to do that through a sustainable lens. So when we bring up sustainability with clients, we shouldn't really start with the carbon stats or any sort of judgment. I think a good place to start is making it really relevant for them, explaining what the opportunities might be, and also the responsibility that they might have. I guess they'll probably know that, but yeah, there might be some scenarios where they don't know the extent of it. So a good way to sort of frame that, I think, is just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And I know that Neil is going to lean on this a little bit in his talk, so not to labour the point too much, but if we take AI, the AI hype, as an example that clients are often really excited about, we have a responsibility to explain the environmental costs of large-scale AI features. And if they decide at that point that the benefits of implementing that would outweigh the cost and the risk to their sustainability credentials, then okay, fair enough. But I think as digital agencies, we do have a responsibility to educate them on the impact that will have over a period of time, not just implementing it as a project. So yeah, I do think we'll see a shift, hopefully soon, to organisations having like a sustainability statement as part of their website, as part of their commitment to showing their sustainability goals, credentials, what they're doing about the problem, how they're mitigating some of the issues. In the same way that we have seen accessibility statements come to rise in the previous year. And then also just being able to calculate that cost. So, giving clients an estimation of the carbon that will be expended throughout the project, but then also what that's going to look like once that service is live and in the wild. And it can work both ways. I think at a high level, if the project is going to cause significant carbon saving over time, then that's good to know up front, and that can play into the decision of whether that should go ahead as a project. But over time, on the other hand, over time, if the project is going to cause damage to the environment and the world around us by using sort of intensive technologies, or creating sort of exhaustive processes, or even just contributing to unnecessary complex end-to-end journeys, then I think we need to speak up. We have a responsibility to speak up at that point. And I know, not to labour this point too much, but Andy or Rick, I guess I'll go into the details of this, but framing this to clients, framing sustainability to clients, it can actually be quite easy because you can link it to so many other conversations. So for example, performance, clean code, fast sites, really lightweight hosting, all improve SEO and UX and the cost efficiency. So that's a good way to tie it in, and the measurability of it as well. So by being able to benchmark and show the carbon footprint of a site and use that to then guide the improvement, it suddenly becomes not an abstract concept of sustainability. It becomes a meaningful and manageable project that you can work on over time. And just knowing that each client will have their own sort of ESG targets and sustainability goals, and I bet a lot of the big clients will have to report on those too, with the new laws that have been brought in. The clients will be caring about this, and I think we'll only see an increase in that. So yeah, I don't think sustainability should be presented as like a sideline sort of like corporate social responsibility initiative or project. It should be sort of woven in really to each project that we do, as part of a smart and a strategic business move. And then just looking at the slides, so just being able to bake a sustainability in to our offerings. So don't just bolt it on the end. Really ensure that from that first wireframe through to the design and the performance, the carbon impact is front of mind, and we can see that things going this way in the market. So in April, GDS, the Government Design Service here in the UK, added an 11th principle, which is to minimise environmental impact. And that talks about how really small changes and improvements can actually make such a big difference over time. So that's something that we can, give us a bit of hope, I think. And if a client comes to us with a brief and it's not part of the brief, make it part of the brief. Really encourage clients to be able to include sustainability as a KPI in that project, to understand if the project has been successful or not. So alongside sort of like security, accessibility, performance, and that really does signal to clients that this is not just a sideline thing. It's not optional. It adds value throughout the project, and they should get excited about that. So just being able to sort of reduce that digital friction, and one of the best things I suppose that we can do for the planet is just help people get to what they need to quickly and clearly. So that means really clear content, logical navigation, making sure there's no complex unnecessary steps in a journey. Sorry, I feel like I've gone over my time a little bit. Sorry, Lasse. But just to sort of wrap up, I think it's time that we need to be really starting to consider in every single piece of work that we do and every conversation that we have, like, are we actually creating something that somebody needs, and who says that we need it? I think we need to be considering the planet as a stakeholder at this point. That's sort of my reflections on this.
Amazing. Thank you, Amy. I think we've discussed the stakeholder thing in our community team as well, right?
Yeah.
It's really like a good phrase and having in the back of your head. Let's move on to Andy.
Thanks, Lasse. Thanks, Amy. As Amy mentioned, the business case for sustainable systems design really does start to add up, especially when you apply it to the right business cases. And sites under load or high traffic, there's lots of opportunities here. And today I'm going to give a real-world example of sustainability in practice. So here's the good news story. First of all, carbon, cost saving, and performance are all intrinsically linked, and in a good way. And when you think about this, it makes sense. Modern cloud services are costed with the amount of data in and out and the amount of compute you use. And all of this takes time as well and delays responses to the end user. So if you start to cache those responses and cache those responses close to the user, and I'm sure this is something that Rick will talk about shortly, you'll see like intrinsic benefits across the spectrum. Next slide, please, Lasse. Now, I have an example of this in the wild. Meet UK Power Networks. UK Power Networks, the district network operator, that's a bit of local, I suppose, a bit of jargon for the electricity network in the UK across the southeast and London. They look after 8 million homes and commercial customers, and they see high traffic during storm events on the site. Now, we went through a large migration piece for them in 2021, where we migrated from Sitecore to Umbraco's headless solution, Umbraco Hardcore. The Sitecore instance itself was hosted on legacy on-premise infrastructure, and we moved it to a cloud-first, cost-effective headless solution using Hardcore. And here are the results. Next slide, please, Lisa. Firstly, performance. So with 2 points of performance here, the first one's around load time. We saw load times drop from 4.22 seconds on the home page to 1.44 seconds. And this is globally as well, because we were caching pages on the edge and close to the user. This load time benefits would have been seen across the globe. Next slide, please, Lisa. The next performance point to mention is scalability, or the number of users it could handle. Now, the old Sitecore instance used to creak at around 5,000 concurrent users. Now, we've tested the new version in excess of 40,000 concurrent users. To make sure I'm clear on this, concurrent users is users doing exactly the same action in the same milliseconds. And to frame this, google.co.uk is around 30,000 concurrent users on the search button. Next slide, please, Lasse. It's significantly cheaper. We saved OpEx cost of 66.61% from migrating from very expensive old legacy VMs and also very hefty Sitecore licenses to a cloud-first, cost-effective solution using Azure and Umbraco Hardcore. The costs of the initial CapEx costs of the project were paid for themselves by the OpEx savings within 3 years of the project. Next slide, please, Lasse. This is the most important one, I guess, and this is why we're here to talk about today, is the carbon savings. This stat here is from the homepage. We saw homepage carbon emissions drop from the old version of 1.44 grams per load to 0.22 grams per load for a series of architectural and technical changes. Now, to start framing this, there was a very large storm event in the UK called Storm Eunice in 2022. If you don't remember this, this was when the Millennium Dome roof got blown off here in London. The carbon savings of the homepage alone during that storm period, and it was over a weekend, over 2 days, first of all, we saw 3.2 million users hit the site. Now, the carbon savings on that alone would have been the same as 9 flights from London to Copenhagen. It's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of users wouldn't have just visited the homepage. The average user's journey is 2 or 3 pages to get the information they want around either life-saving services or reporting a power cut or dangerous situations. Again, back to Mike's point at the start, very good use case for using this sort of technology when it has like tech for good. So the overall results themselves, I think, speak for themselves. And I think the application of modern progressive technologies at scale have saved UK Power Networks money, increased performance for their users, and slash carbon emissions across the board. I think I'm now handing over to Neil to talk about the hidden challenges of the web. Thank you.
Cheers, Andy. Thanks, mate. Okay, so yeah, in my experience, selling tech-based services purely from a low carbon perspective is really hard, and the main reason for that is because the vast majority of websites still have a really small emissions footprint when compared to the rest of the company's operations. And that isn't to say that we shouldn't do anything about it. I really firmly believe in the fact that every brand counts, but context is really important, and therefore I think a sort of high level perspective is needed. And really, I think the internet needs to be better. And I'll spark a few stats at you just to sort of illustrate what I mean by that. So despite significant improvements in the last 5 years, less than half of the web pages tested pass all 3 of the core Web Vitals tests since 2015, which one of the things that Mike alluded to when we had the Paris Agreement back in 2015. Since then, average web page size has increased by 92% on desktop and 177% on mobile. And in this decade, accessibility scores have increased and are now averaging about 84%, which is really good, but less than a third of websites actually have sufficient color contrast. And when looking at 2023 versus 2024, there was a 20% increase in DDoS attacks. And of the roughly 18,000 organizations that were affected by the SolarWinds cyber attack, on average, it cost them about 11% of their revenue. A third of all internet traffic is now bad bots, and websites are still dropping a double-digit number of cookies on our devices. So what all of that says to me is that we need to collectively care about lots of different things about usability, accessibility, page speed, bandwidth, security, privacy, etc. And these standards should all be looked at collectively so that we maximize them as a group. And impact on the planet doesn't supersede any of those things, and nor do all of those things automatically lead to a low carbon website. They must all be seen as these positive design constraints. And what does that look like across a project? Some of the things Amy sort of touched on earlier, but for agencies, when we're working with clients and on their web projects, getting a client excited about making their website part of a better future for the internet is a great start. Setting those sort of ethical success measures, following your ethical design and development guidelines, and for impact on the planet, you can take inspiration from things like the W3C sustainability guidelines, or the specific ones that we as a council wrote for Umbraco websites relatively recently. But I think it's really important to have a set which is unique to your organization based on your projects and processes and the way that you design and develop things. And then be constantly measuring against those success measures, potentially even blocking releases that aren't good enough. And when you are making those measurements, using tools which really go below the sort of superficial level of analysis. And I use a tool called Cardamom to measure emissions from websites for that reason. And then once a website is live, keep measuring, keep reporting back to clients or product owners, those types of people. And we all know how websites can drift in terms of scope and performance and code bases and usability. So those types of measurements are also a really great way of keeping a website really focused. And then to bring it back to Mike's point about honesty and transparency and humility, we really need way more of that in regard to the state of the internet and the companies and the infrastructure that underpins it. So if you are doing anything related to what we're talking about today, like go and shout about it, shout about what went well, but crucially also shout about what didn't go so well. There's a real lack of useful stories and case studies in this space. And coming at it from a slightly different angle, and again, one of the things that Amy was talking about, this sort of legal focused accessibility statements and cookie statements that are on a lot of websites as a sort of tick box. What if they became something more interesting? What if they became sort of commitments or promises to people and other stakeholders? What if they contained really transparent stats about your progress on your success measures? And what if they had really honest commitments about what's being worked on next to improve the experience, both for the people who are using the website, but also reducing the impact on those that aren't using the website? And another vital aspect to all of this is to question and to interrogate the claims of your suppliers and your partners, and be prepared to challenge the status quo. And there's so much of that exists within our industry. So just to zoom in on data centers for a second. So in Ireland, data centers account for more than 20% of the country's electricity use. In 5 US states, it's now more than 10%. Yet it's actually projected that data centers are and probably will remain like a relatively small consumer of electricity when compared to other things like transport and construction and heating and cooling, that kind of stuff. And that's despite the growth of AI. But they are really extractive and disconnected from society and communities in lots of other ways, like the water they use, the land they take up, the construction techniques used, the infrastructure they require, and the security around them as well. And this is really where challenging the status quo gets quite exciting, in my opinion. There are some really great examples of alternatives to this approach, and the best one, in my opinion, is Deep Green, which is a really different kind of data center. So they attach their data centers to swimming pools and heat networks and other existing infrastructure that can reuse the waste heat that they create. Using impact on the planet as a design constraint has really led Deep Green to this sort of amazing innovation and something close to a circular model with heat reuse that more than complies with the extensive legislation that's existing in right now and will also be coming in the future. So I think that illustrates that the planet shouldn't be seen as a blocker to innovation. I think, in fact, it's an accelerator for the products and services that are really good for both people and planet. And also with Deep Green, they have the data centers are obviously pretty small, judging by where they're, the fact that they're sort of within existing infrastructure. But that size constraint is actually a really positive thing, because that's really aligned to the way the industry is moving with these incredibly dense, powerful racks that are becoming more of the norm. So no matter how small it might feel, I think you can always be taking climate action in your role. There's always a supplier or a framework or a way of working that means that you can go further. And there are lots of co-benefits with other connected areas as well. And if you tell others about what you're doing, you do that with honesty and transparency, like Mike was saying, I think there's a whole bunch of other people who will be able to then stand on your shoulders. Back to you, Lasse.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and as you said, we are a bit behind, but over to you, Rick. You still have your slot, so take it easy.
Thank you very much, Lasse. So after all of this, for the people who may be technologists and software engineers and developers on the call, you might be thinking to yourself, where do I begin? Where do I actually start to make a difference day to day? And it's a great question, and a lot of what has been talked about has already kind of touched on this, but I think there's 3 areas, as we'll see on the next slide, that really overlap each other. They've all been touched on already: accessibility, sustainability, and performance. A site that is quicker to load will generally be more sustainable by definition, as minimal assets are going to be transferred, or it's deployed closer to the edge, closer to your users. But also a site that has minimal data transfer might use system fonts over custom ones, and fonts like Times New Roman and Arial are great for accessibility. When we review sites' performance reports and improve performance, we are improving accessibility, because only when a page is fully downloaded can assistive technology interact with it. And there are ways of benchmarking, and we have to know where we're currently at before we try and make a difference. So if we could have the next slide, please, Lasse. Yeah, that's it. Perfect. Thank you. So as I was saying, we have to know where we're at currently before we try and make a difference. Every website on the internet produces an amount of carbon, and there are ways of measuring this and ways that are becoming standards. And there are many different tools and websites out there that let you do this. One of the most well-known, most well-used is the original website carbon calculator, websitecarbon.com. And this will give you a good breakdown of the carbon footprint of the front end of your site as a user sees it. It's a very small part of the overall footprint, because you've got to think about network transfer, you've got to think about your server load and hosting there. But this will give you a good idea of how performant and carbon friendly the front end of your site is. So this is websitecarbon.com. It's developed by a company called Wholegrain Digital, and it gives you useful metrics to compare to. But if we think now about best practices and about things we can do day in, day out to actually change the carbon footprint and improve the carbon footprint of our site. The first thing I want to point to on the next slide is that we have written some sustainability best practices as a team. The team launched in May 2023, and since then we've been meeting monthly to discuss how we can have an impact primarily on our favourite CMS. And with so many people on the team having given talks over the past couple of years, the conversation quickly turned to how do we get information out in the open about what developers, engineers, content editors could do to make a difference. People far and wide have now heard about the state of the world and want to make a difference, so what can we actually do? And this is where the best practices come in. We've taken all the information we know and have shared where the industry is at as a whole, and we've come up with some best practices for writing green code whilst working with Umbraco. The other thing to point out on the next slide is something that Neil mentioned, is the W3C Web Sustainability Guidelines. A wonderful group of people called the Sustainable Web Design Community Group have been working with the W3C, the creators of standards and guidelines for the web, to draft these standards that we can adhere to when creating digital products and services. And it goes beyond technical things, it goes into UX and all sorts of other things. Their first draft of these guidelines was released in September 23 and goes into great details of the kinds of considerations we should make when designing, building and maintaining websites. And this has now moved on to become an editor's draft, which means it's being presented regularly to the W3C for consideration to be turned into an actual standard. But one of the key things that I've found is something called the Low Impact Manifesto. This was released by an organization called Organic Basics. And I think it brilliantly captures what the sustainability team have been trying to do, like no other summary I've seen. They had a demo Shopify website. You can see the source code of it at that link there. And it adhered to all these rules, even going as far as shutting down completely when the power grid it was running on has a high carbon intensity. And if you can do anything at all to impact the carbon output of your site, these are the kinds of things to start with. Now, these I think are slightly wordy. So on the next slide, there is just a slimmed down version of these guidelines and things you should be doing. And note that they don't necessarily give specific ways to do these things, but what I would suggest from a development point of view is doing things that the browser is already going to help you to do. So when it comes to lazy loading images, you can add the loading equals lazy attribute to your images. Store data locally, point 6, use a service worker, put your data closer to the users by putting it on the edge. Loading essential scripts only, number 8. Don't load Google Maps on every single page if it's only used on your contact page. Think about these things as you are going and building the sites that you are working on. And then finally, just want to come on to something that we have been working on for most of the time that we've been going as a team, and that is our sustainability package for Umbraco. It is available on Umbraco's marketplace. It was built by myself and Tom, who's also on our sustainability team as well. And it gives you a way of running checks against your Umbraco content right in the back office of the site. So you will get a content app that appears, the screenshot of it on the next slide, a content app that appears in your back office that runs a check using CO2.js against the front end of your site and gives you information on the size of the page, the CO2 output, and how that rates against the website carbon emission ratings. You will also get a sustainability dashboard that appears that gives you an overview of the most recent ones you've run, and also their carbon rating, and then you can drill down a little bit more into those stats and see a little bit more about those details. And there's also some great things that we want to add to this. We want to be able to do a full site audit rather than just going in and doing individual pages. But what I'd encourage people to do is use this in tandem with other tools. So if you are hosted in Umbraco Cloud, use Cloud Sustainability Dashboard. If you're in Azure or AWS, there are tools available to you that you can hook into around your emissions and your billing data that give you a fuller picture of how your website's hosted and its carbon footprint. Thanks, Lasse.
Thank you, everyone. That was really nice. We have 5 minutes left, I think. So I think I'll jump to a question that that covers, you could say, most of what people have asked. Around getting more concrete actions. Now, Rick, you were very concrete if you are a developer. Amy, you touched a bit on the agency part, but what would you answer if I asked the question, what are the concrete actions that I that you would like to see from agencies and companies watching this webinar? Maybe even start with you, Mike, who does not work with in an agency, but now seen 4 people from the agency industry talking about it.
Yeah, well, it was interesting for me listening to some of the kind of detailed tips on website design just now, and it seems to me there are some, there's some really good stuff to go at there, for sure. I mean, I was interested by the statistic from you,
Neil.
Andy, that am I on mute? No, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I
Okay.
was talking over you. Sorry.
Yeah. So your statistic, about bringing the carbon from a website page down from 1 point something grams to 0.2 grams, it's come down by 7%. By a factor of 7. That's huge. And then the question is always, what's happening on the rebound effect? Is it going to be accessed more than 7 times as often? In which case the footprint goes up, not down. But I think that and your point, Amy, about keeping things simple, like asking the question, is this bit of functionality actually needed and valuable or not? And for me, that's a wider question for us all to be asking about kind of every aspect of our lives as well. There's a kind of a simplification that we need more generally, in life, if we're going to have a sustainable economy. So it definitely seems to me to apply to websites.
But Mike, talking about this, the rebound effect, which is the Jevons paradox that you also touch in the book. So, and yeah, you showed in your slide that the input should go down, but in this case, when Rick showcases a bunch of good ideas, and same from Andy, how should we stop doing that? What is your of course, I guess the answer is no, but how should we include the Jevons paradox in this thinking?
Okay, so what the Jevons paradox tells us is the two other things are really important. So one is, what's the website fundamentally doing? Because that's how, one of the mechanisms by which the Jevons paradox comes back to bite us is that if you create a more efficient website that is encouraging people to buy 5 times more clothing than they actually need, then it looks like a step forward, but it's a step backwards. So actually, there's a kind of a whole dimension there, which is this fundamentally a website that the world needs to have? And that's, for me, that's probably quite a challenging dimension to look at, but a really, really important one. And then the other thing is about the narrative that you have with all your different stakeholder groups, and including, for me, it would be for the industry, including government, because there's the whole question of pushing for a carbon price. Because if we can just find a way of constraining the fossil fuel, I mean, we have to have it. And actually, when we do constrain that fossil fuel, it becomes an opportunity for anybody in any industry that has got an efficient practice. So if you've got efficient website production and suddenly fossil fuel gets constrained and energy gets constrained, then the fact that you can do things efficiently will give you such a massive competitive advantage. So I would encourage you all to be pushing for that as part of your sustainability.
And with that, Mike, I think we almost covered 1 hour, and I think we have to stop. But thank you all for joining, also for those listening and watching out there, and hope that we can see some improvements on our website and our world all overall. So thank you all.